pregnant women always doing ridiculous things in public. Have you no shame? Can't you be pregnant and normal? Or must you be abnormal before everyone believes that you're truly pregnant? She said to the woman, who burst out in tears as she left the Akara stand devastated. Everyone around looked at Ihoma in disgust as they wondered how a woman who should know better would treat a fellow woman in such a way. Once upon a time, in the busy town of Owerri, lived a woman whose name was Ihoma. Ihoma was a woman whose tongue was sharper than a razor. If there was one thing she disliked most in her life, it was pregnant women and their nonsense cravings, as she always called them. Ihoma believed that all pregnant women were pretenders. In fact, she swore that these women did all they did for attention, as Ihoma could not understand why a woman would suddenly crave ridiculous things. To her, these women only wanted to stress their partners, or worse still, gain sympathy from the public, who were easily fooled by their shenanigans. Ihoma was so convinced of her beliefs, she always got irritated when pregnant women displayed their pregnancy-induced character around her. Ihoma was not one to hide her irritation. She lashed out at pregnant women whenever she saw them displaying unnecessary behaviors in public, not caring whose feelings she bruised in the process. One morning, Ihoma decided to buy akara from Mama Ekaite's shop. She arrived at the akara spot and met a pregnant woman who was sweating and fanning herself. She brought out a bag of ice cubes, tore it with her teeth, and began chewing them one after the other like someone whose life depended on it. The coldness soothed her immediately as beads of water rolled down her chin. Ihoma stared at her angrily as she hissed loudly and began to speak without control. Are you possessed? What nonsense craving is this one again? Her voice thundered in anger as the pregnant woman looked at her confused. People turned as they watched the whole drama unfold. The pregnant woman paused, her cheeks full like a squirrel as she stared at Ihoma embarrassed. But Ihoma was not yet done. She continued to bark at the poor woman, asking if pregnancy was now a sickness. You pregnant women, always doing ridiculous things in public. Have you no shame? Can't you be pregnant and normal? Or must you be abnormal before everyone believes that you're truly pregnant? She said to the woman, who burst out in tears as she left the Akara stand devastated. Everyone around looked at Ihoma in disgust as they wondered how a woman who should know better would treat a fellow woman in such a way. Ihoma noticed their stares, but this did not faze her. She collected her akara and walked away, not caring that her words had broken a woman whose only crime was satisfying her pregnancy cravings. She arrived home and could not stop talking to her sister about it. Ihoma, still fuming in anger, narrated the whole story to her. Imagine the pregnant woman, chewing eyes like a goat. She didn't even have the common decency to close her mouth while she was chewing. She said to her sister Benita, who asked why she was so worked up. Pregnancy changes the body system of a woman, the same way periods do. You should take it easy on these women, because you don't even know what your own pregnancy would look like, Benita said to her sister Ihoma, who beat her chest and said, You see, when I get pregnant, I will not disgrace myself like that. I will be calm, normal like a human being, not disgracing myself like a cow. Her sister Benita shook her head as she watched her narrate how their mother birthed 6 children without all this drama. Her mother gave birth to 6 children in her time, alone. She didn't act like these dramatic women. No, because all these pregnant women are all pretenders. All of them. Watch and see. I'll be the most stress-free pregnant woman this town will ever see, she said to Benita, who teased her for crying during her period. You have not finished chesting normal menstrual pain, oh. It's pregnancy that you now have the power for, she said to Ihoma, who rolled her eyes in anger and grumbled as she walked away. Weeks passed, and Ihoma came across a video of another pregnant woman online who was licking clay as if it was chocolate ice cream. Everyone in the comments had an opinion as Ihoma took her time to pen down her own thoughts. She bashed the woman, calling her an attention seeker who was more focused on gaining likes and views on her post than focusing on the actual well-being of her unborn child. Ihoma gave the woman a piece of her mind as so many women began to question if Ihoma had ever had a child in her life. How can you say this to a pregnant woman when you have never walked in her shoes? They asked Ihoma, who replied them that she didn't need to walk in the woman's shoes because she was not an attention seeker. I I'll wear my own pregnancy like a crown and carry myself like royalty, she said as some people clapped for her, whilst others bashed her for being so insensitive. But Ihoma did not care. In fact, she met a young handsome man in the comments who agreed with her and carried on their conversation in the inbox. They chatted for hours, getting to know each other as Ihoma realized that he worked not so far from her office. They met up a few days later and could not stop talking about all the strange pregnancy stories that they had heard. It was such a fun meeting that Ihoma developed a strong connection with him, a feeling that she had not felt for anyone in her entire life. Days turned into months, and the young man Ida asked her to be his wife. Ihoma was over the moon. She danced in excitement as she arrived home to meet with her sister Benita, flaunting her ring as she gushed at the idea of finally getting married. "Sister, Ida has proposed to me. I'll finally marry the man of my dreams." Benita's smile was slow, controlled and uneasy. She sat beside Ihoma, her voice steady but thick with caution as she began to speak. "Ihoma, are you sure this is the man you want to marry? A man who thinks pregnancy is foolishness? Ihoma, this man mocks pregnant women the same way you do. His mind and yours move in the same direction, towards judgment and not empathy. That kind of marriage frightens me." Oh. Ihoma blinked, confused. "What is wrong with that? A man who sees pregnancy as nothing but exaggeration is the perfect husband for me. We agree on everything, and that's what makes it perfect." Benita exhaled deeply as she looked at Ihoma and began to speak. "That's exactly what scares me, Ihoma," she said as Ihoma frowned. "What are you trying to say, Benita? That I should not marry him?" Benita placed her hand on Ihoma's shoulder, her voice soft like evening breeze as she spoke to her sister with love. "Ihoma, a man who believes pregnancy is weakness will have no softness when you become the one who is weak. A man who calls pregnant women dramatic may call you dramatic one day. A man who mocks cravings may mock your own cravings if you ever have them. Think deeply, Ihoma. Love is sweet too, but experience is bitter when pride is involved," she said to Ihoma, who laughed proudly and replied, "I'll never be like those women. My pregnancy will be smooth. Cravings will not disgrace me. Ida and I will be fine, so you have no reasons to be worried." Benita looked at her sister with pity, deep sorrowful pity, the kind only someone who has lived longer can feel. But Ihoma refused to listen to the voice of wisdom. She went ahead to marry Ida, a decision that she believed was the best, until she finally got pregnant. At first, everything was going smoothly as Ihoma flaunted her pregnancy for the world to see, proving to everyone that pregnant women were indeed pretenders. She had no cravings and was always full of energy, something her husband admired about her, until she approached her second trimester, the time when everything changed. Ihoma woke up in the middle of the night as rain poured heavily outside. She stood out in the rain, her eyes closed, as she inhaled deeply like someone who was now smelling her favorite fragrance. Ihoma could not control how she felt in that moment. She spread her arms as the rain soaked her to the bones. Ida watched her from the doorway confused as he urged her to come inside the house. "Ihoma, come inside. You want to catch a cold?" he said to Ihoma, who ignored him completely, her body trembling with satisfaction as she inhaled again and again, like someone who was finally breathing for the very first time. That night was the beginning of something that Ihoma never saw coming. She woke up the next morning with cravings crashing down on her like a thunderstorm. Ihoma began to eat toothpaste as if she was eating her favorite snack. She would squeeze the tube into her mouth and chew it like gum. Before she knew what was happening, one tube finished and then another. Within 2 days, 4 full tubes of paste had finally disappeared into her stomach like sweet. Ihoma tried to hide her strange cravings from her husband, who could not help but notice how her entire body oozed of toothpaste. At first, he thought it was his imagination, until one morning, when he walked in on her, devouring a tube of toothpaste with her eyes closed. Ida could not believe his eyes. "Are you mad?" he yelled angrily, as Ihoma opened her eyes in shock, embarrassed to see her husband standing there with judging eyes. "Are you eating toothpaste?" he asked Ihoma, who tried to lie to cover up her craving, but the tubes of empty toothpaste that lay on the sink exposed her truth like nakedness. Ihoma froze, guilt written all over her face as her husband stared at her with disgust and called her a lunatic. "Is this madness, or or your means of seeking attention? He asked Ihoma, who tried to explain to him that she could not help it, that something inside her body demanded it, and that she had no control over it. But Ida was not a man who understood softness. He began to yell angrily at her, calling her a mad woman, as Ihoma stood there in tears. She watched her husband transform from the loving man that she married to a monster in human form. From that day on, his love for her began to wane. Everything she did began to irritate him, and Ihoma could not control her emotions. Her hormones were all over the place, as each week came with a different craving. Ihoma began to crave charcoal. She bought stacks of wood and burnt them in her backyard just to chew the blackened pieces like biscuits. She hid behind the house, biting them like bread, as soot covered her lips and teeth. Each bite filled her with a satisfaction that only her could explain. Ida returned home from work one afternoon and caught her munching on some charcoal like a snack. His eyes shone in disbelief as he began to yell at her at the top of his voice. Ihoma, what's all this nonsense now? Are you mad or pregnant? Why are you eating charcoal? Are you now an exhaust pipe? He asked Ihoma angrily as he stared at her in disgust. Neighbors peeped through their windows as they began to laugh at Ihoma, whose mouth and face looked funny and black. Even children laughed and began to call her an exhaust pipe. Ihoma cried herself to sleep at night, her pillow soaked with tears, as she began to regret how badly she treated pregnant women in the past. Every day was now a struggle for her, as not only was she dealing with strange cravings that she could not control, her husband Ida continued to make her life a living hell. He moved her out of their bedroom and even stopped coming home on some days. Ihoma navigated her difficult pregnancy alone. The fairy tale she once envisioned had now turned into a terrible nightmare. Ihoma became a prisoner in her own marriage. Her husband constantly reminded her of how weak she was. He called her an attention seeker, whose goal in life was to ruin his happiness at every given opportunity. Ida bragged to her how his sisters all navigated their pregnancies easily without bringing shame to their husbands. He even began to compare her with their neighbor's wife, who just gave birth but always looked good when she was pregnant. Ihoma, Cyprian's wife does not have two heads, so she just gave birth and has never disgraced her husband the way you are disgracing me in this house. Have you ever seen her eating charcoal like a fool? He asked Ihoma, whose eyes were now filled with tears, to hear him compare her to their neighbor's wife. Ihoma stood there sad as she watched her husband dress up for a party. Their neighbor Cyprian was throwing a party for his wife, who just gave birth a few days ago. He warned Ihoma not to come for the party because he could not stand her disgracing him in public. Stay at home, he said coldly, adjusting his shirt as he looked at himself in the mirror. I cannot have you embarrassing me with your charcoal teeth and toothpaste in your breath, he said to Ihoma, whose heart broke to see how irritated her husband was of her. His words cut her open like a knife as tears poured out of her eyes. Ihoma stood there silently, one hand on her swollen belly, as she watched the man who she loved dress beautifully for another woman's celebration, leaving her behind like a forgotten furniture. The silence in the house was louder than any insult he had ever said to her. Ihoma sank to the cold floor, her hands trembling as tears rolled down her beautiful eyes. Her sister called in that moment, and Ihoma could not help but pour out her frustrations. She told her everything that was happening, and Benita, whose voice had once warned her, broke into quiet tears on the other end of the phone. Ihoma, I wish you listened to me, she said as Ihoma cried even louder. Benita tried to comfort her. She offered to pray for her as Ihoma closed her eyes and cried, not because of the cravings, but because reality had finally humbled her in a way that she never thought possible. Benita prayed over the phone as she cried, asking God to soften Ida's heart and strengthen Ihoma through her season of weakness. Benita advised Ihoma to be patient because even the strongest palm tree bends during storm season but never breaks. She told Ihoma to take care of herself, promising to pay her a visit in a few days. Ihoma, still heartbroken, promised to do so. The line went silent as the house once again became painfully quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, just a woman sitting there in her regret. Ihoma cried until her throat burned. She remembered how she insulted pregnant women in the past. The memories haunted her in a way that she could no longer bear. Every sound outside reminded her of the party which she was banned from attending, a laughter she could not join, just because her husband was ashamed of her very existence. Ihoma laid on the floor in regret as she prayed to God and asked for help. Her heart was too heavy as she decided to close her eyes and catch some sleep, because sleep in that moment was far better than being awake. Hours later, Ihoma was awoken by her husband, whose eyes were now filled with tears. She watched in shock as he fell to his knees and began to ask for her forgiveness. At first, Ihoma thought it was all a dream. She sat there confused as her husband began to narrate all that happened at the party. Ida went to congratulate Cyprian, who asked after his wife Ihoma. Ida began to narrate how his wife always made it her duty to embarrass him with her strange pregnancy cravings. He narrated the whole story to Cyprian, who rebuked him for even thinking in such a way. Cyprian narrated how his wife ate his bathing sponge and even slept with a handkerchief soaked in petrol, as that was the only smell that calmed her nerves and made her to sleep at night. She even went blind in one eye during her second trimester. He added softly, his voice trembling with memory as Ida stood there frozen as he listened. I stood by her, he said slowly, his eyes glassy with tears. I bathed her, carried her, fed her like a baby, because pregnancy is not easy. It is war, a war that only mothers fight on the front line, and women must be their shield and not their enemy, Cyprian said to Ida, who felt something snap within him. He stood there and listened as Cyprian said some words to him that shattered his ego. A good husband covers his wife's weakness. He does not expose her. He protects her even when she cannot protect herself. Ida felt something shatter inside his chest. He recalled Ihoma sitting alone at home, rejected, mocked, punished for a body that she could not control. Her craving wasn't madness. It was a cry for care, a cry that he completely ignored. Ida excused himself from the party as he walked home, every step heavier than the last, as Cyprian's words replayed in his head over and over again. Now here he was, kneeling before his wife like a broken man. Ihoma, he whispered as tears poured down his eyes. I failed you, he said, his head bowing into her lap like a child who was now seeking comfort. For the first time since the pregnancy began, Ida held her belly gently, like something which was fragile and sacred. I mocked you. I abandoned you. I forgot that you're carrying my child. I treated you like a burden instead of a blessing. Please forgive me. Let me start again. Let me love you the right way this time, he said to her, as silence sat between them for a moment. Then, slowly, Ihoma placed a hand on his head, not because the pain was gone, not because the wounds were healed, but because she knew that pride had finally died in both of them. From that day on, Ida became a completely new man. He held her hair while she chewed charcoal, monitored her toothpaste tubes with care, and even massaged her swollen feet. He fed her from his own hands whenever her cravings hit her like a wave, and when labor came, loud, terrifying, and wild, Ida never left her side. Ihoma gave birth to a bouncing baby boy. She learned her lessons through her pregnancy, that pregnant women were not pretenders. They were not busybodies who did all they did for attention. Rather, they were warriors who risked their lives to bring life into the world. That was how Ihoma and her husband learned their lessons the hard way, never to mock a pregnant woman again. The lesson to be learned from this story is that you should never mock a pain that you have never lived. Ihoma insulted pregnant women until life humbled her through the very thing she mocked. She finally understood that cravings are not madness, weakness or attention seeking, but battles of the body that only a pregnant woman can explain. Many pains cannot be understood from the outside, and no one has the right to judge what they have never experienced. From her pregnancy, Ihoma learned that compassion is far more honorable than criticism, and that motherhood is not for the faint-hearted, but for warriors clothed in grace. The lesson is clear. Never mock a journey your feet have not walked. I hope you enjoy.